Everybody. So a quick question, have any of you used Drupal VM before? Raise your hand if you have. Just want to know. Okay, so a few people have. That's good. I wanted to give a quick kind of overview of how you get it, how you set it up, where to go for help, that kind of thing. And then I'll go into a few things that I do in my, used to be daily. Sometimes I don't do these things every day. When I'm stuck in meetings all day, but a lot of the things that you'd use in your daily workflow with Drupal 8 especially. First of all, if you wanted to get a copy of Drupal VM, the easiest way, well actually there's an easier way, but I won't get into that right now. The easiest way generally is to go to drupalvm.com and download a copy. And I've actually done that. I downloaded a copy into my downloads folder. And then there's a quick start guide that's linked here that'll get you up and running quickly. The simplest use case for Drupal VM is you want a quick Drupal 8 site to play with, and it will build you one. And it'll use the Drupal project, which sets up a Drupal 8 site using Composer and does all these magical things. And the first time you set it up, it could take a little while, like 10 or 20 minutes at least, because it has to download a virtual box that's 500 megabytes in size or something like that. But after you bring it up once, future times that you rebuild it or build other VMs, it's a lot quicker. So after you download it, you can install Vagrant and VirtualBox. Vagrant is a system that lets you build and delete virtual machines on your computer really quickly and easily. It's similar in scope to what you would do with Docker, but it's a little more flexible in that you can build Docker containers and you can build full-fledged virtual machines, and you can use it with all kinds of different software. So that's Vagrant, and then VirtualBox is basically a way to run virtual machines on your computer. So little mini computers inside your computer. And the reason I like doing it this way instead of using something else that would install Linux or install Apache and MySQL and all that on your computer is I can save my configuration and use it on any computer. So I have a computer upstairs and downstairs, and I have a PC laptop too running Windows 10. All three of those computers have the exact same Drupal setup for me, down to whether or not certain memory settings are set and all that kind of stuff. Instead of me having to go into settings files and click on things, and one side I need to do one thing and another thing, Drupal VM lets me set it all up in my Drupal VM configuration. So anyway, you install these two applications. They're available for Mac, Windows, and Linux. Then you download Drupal VM, and then you go into this directory and run Vagrant up. And in the interest of time, I actually ran Vagrant up a few minutes ago so that you guys didn't have to sit here for 6 minutes and watch it deploy a new virtual machine. So after the first time you do it, it only takes 10 or 20 seconds to start the virtual machine. And once it does that, you'll get a website at drupalvm.dev. And once that finishes, I think when I'm sharing it, wastes a little bit of extra processor power. And it looks like it's just about done. Okay, so it finishes, and then I can go to drupalvm.dev, and this Zoom thing is getting in my way. You can't see it on your screen, but so I look kind of ridiculous right now, but I'm trying to hide the Zoom toolbar. I'll just move my window instead. Okay, so it installs a copy of Drupal, and the default admin username and password is admin and admin. Pretty creative there. And if your goal is just to install Drupal and test out a module or work on a module or something, this is all you'd ever need. And whenever I do core development or when I'm debugging a contributed module or something like that, I'll usually do this because it only takes me a few minutes to get a new environment set up. There's a bunch of different tools that do this kind of workflow. Some of them are even faster. There's some Docker-based tools out there that let you build a new Drupal 8 site in 10 seconds. But this also lets me do some other things that I'll talk about in a little bit. One cool thing about, hello whoever just joined, someone else, Anan. So another cool thing that this does by default is if I open my Drupal VM folder, after I built it, there's a new Drupal directory, And this is created by the Drupal project, which is like an open source composer-based Drupal building project. And let me make this window a little smaller because I like looking at you people, but not that much. And inside this Drupal directory, it sets up a Drupal site for you using Composer. And the actual Drupal install is inside of a web folder. It's just called web. And this is more familiar for anybody who hasn't used Composer too much. This is what Drupal looks like. This is what the actual project looks like. So using a Composer workflow, if I were in this folder, instead of downloading a module off of Drupal.org and dragging it into my modules directory and all that, you can use Composer and say Composer require Drupal/devel 1.x, something like that. And then that'll download the latest stable version of the devel module. And then, of course, you can also use drush commands like drush and I think it's Drupal VM.Drupal. VM.dev is the default site, but you can change these kinds of things. And you can do a module installer. You could even download modules through Drush, but it's best if you're using Composer to manage your site, to do everything through Composer. But that's the default way that Drupal VM sets up a site. And it's running, I think, the latest version of Drupal 8. Let me go to the status report. It should be like 8.2.5 or maybe 8.xdev. Yeah, so 8.2.5. And by default, Drupal VM comes with PHP 7. It comes with, where's MySQL? Somewhere in here, database. It comes with MySQL 5.7 and Apache 2.4. But one of the cool things about Drupal VM, especially since all of us have websites in different kinds of environments, is you can customize almost anything out of the box. So if I go into this Drupal VM download directory, there's a default config YAML file. And this is just like in Drupal core, all the configuration is stored as this YAML. If I open this up, it shows me all the different settings that power the VM. So you can choose what operating system it's running. You can choose the host name for it. By default, it's just drupalvm.dev. You can choose a different IP address for it. You can also customize the way that it's networked and even share it on the public internet if you really wanted to. Generally, don't do that unless you really know what you're doing, because people can hack your computer if you share things over the internet. And then you can also change things like how the site is built. So like I said, this builds a site for you using Composer. But if you already have a Drupal 8 website and you just want to use Drupal VM with it, there's a few different ways you can do that. One is you can download Drupal VM separately and configure it. Another way is you can require Drupal VM as a dependency of your project. So if you're using Composer to build your Drupal site, you can say Composer require Geerling guy /Drupal VM, and you have a copy of Drupal VM set up with your site. Acquia actually does this inside of the BLT, the build and launch tool that it has. You can kind of get a prepackaged virtual machine for your Drupal project through there that way. And then you can also start with just a composer.json file. If you don't want to use the Drupal project, it's from the Drupal Composer organization on GitHub. If you don't want to use that, you can use your own manually created composer.json. And there's an example of that also. Oops, that's the makefile from Drush. You can also build it using a makefile from Drush. So basically, there's a bunch of different ways you can build Drupal sites. By default, we use Composer and the Drupal project, but you can do whatever you want. And if you need the information for doing all that kind of stuff, if you go to docs.drupalvm.com, let me actually go here. There's a docs link on the project page, and there's a docs link from the public website. If I go to the docs site, it shows you how you can build the site using a makefile, how you can build a site using Composer, and the different ways you can use Composer. Also, how you can just use a local code base. This is for some smaller sites that I manage. I literally download Drupal off Drupal.org and download the modules and drag them in and stuff like that. You can do it that way too. And you can also do multi-site. So you can have more than one website. You can either have multiple code bases or even just one code base with multiple domains pointing at it, so you can use Drupal's multi-site capabilities. All that's pretty easy to configure. You can set up multiple databases and multiple virtual hosts in Apache. But another thing that's cool about the way that Drupal VM's set up, if we keep scrolling down this configuration file, is you can change things like, where did I think I missed it already. You can change the web server, so you can use Apache or Nginx, depending on what kind of server you're using in your hosting environment. It's usually better to use, if you're using Nginx through your hosting provider, it's good to use it when you're developing, because sometimes there's weird little bugs that pop up if you're not using the same web server. You can also use Postgres. You can technically also use SQLite if you wanted to. Some of these things are more low level than I think a lot of people would care to know about, but the options are here to do almost anything. And then finally, going down a bit further in this configuration file, you can also configure extra software to run on Drupal VM. And by default, it installs some things like this tool called Adminer. And I'll show you who here has ever used PHP My Admin. Anybody? So a few people are familiar with it. Adminer is basically the same thing. It's just a lot more lightweight. I kind of like it more for quick work. And if you go to adminer. Whatever your host name is, you can log in. I'm going to use Drupal, log in, and then you can browse your database just like that. Drupal VM even sets up a dashboard. I think it's at dashboard.drupalvm.dev. And it shows you all the sites that you have configured in your VM. Right now we just have the default one, but it gives you the doc route. It tells you what Drush alias to use to manage it. Gives you links to Adminer. There's also a cool tool called Mailhog that instead of having to install the Devel module and tell it to catch all your email, you can use this Mailhog application, and it just catches all emails from Drupal and puts them on the web. So if I go to this interface, it'll show me there's nothing here, but if I were sending emails from the site, this catches them so you don't accidentally do what I did a few years ago and send 9,000 emails to someone when you're doing some testing on your Drupal site. It also gives you other information. So if you want to use a tool to connect to your database, it's there. And all the databases in the system, you can click a link to go straight to log into it in Adminer. So I click on here. Oh, I think the password is root. And so you can get to your databases that way too, instead of knowing the Adminer link. So it's there's a lot of little tools built in that make it pretty easy to get started and get using. But I wanted to, well, first of all, I'll take a short break. Are there any questions at this point? I know I've gone like from 0 to 100 pretty quickly, but I wanted to get you started with where to go to get help or see how to do something. Any questions? Everybody thinks that I've talked perfectly so far, so that's good.
I mean, I guess there's some obvious extensions that I can envision where configuration management is a little easier.
It's a little quiet. I can't quite hear. I think because you're a little further from the microphone.
Real close to talk.
Sorry. Yeah, I can hear Dave.
This is totally not awkward.
Sorry.
So there's some obvious extensions that I can imagine to this, especially in an agency environment where it makes configuration management a lot easier, and you can just say, hook up to this Git repo for a default installation on a Drupal profile. So I think it sounds extremely extensible and awesome, and that's all I was really trying to say. It was more kudos than a question. So,
oh, thanks. Yeah. Oh, and to that point too, there's a few features that are less documented too that since this is tips and tricks, I might as well give you a tip. There's the ability to use Drupal VM to actually build your production servers too. So let's say you're a nonprofit or you're somebody who wants to build a quick Drupal site for somebody and have it with a pretty decent Drupal-based configuration, and you don't want to pay the $10 or $20 or $40 a month for whatever hosting provider that specializes in Drupal. I'm trying to find where it is. There's a documentation page on how to use Drupal VM to actually manage your development and your production environments at the same time. there's a caveat right now. I'm actually doing this for a few of my sites, but I don't give any full support for like your actual production environment. But there's instructions for you to be able to do that. And once you've done it, once you've built a few local VMs, you'll realize like this is actually a really easy way to build and manage Drupal servers if you can get past the basics and kind of understand a little bit of what's going on. You can even use like Amazon Web Services, you can use DigitalOcean, whatever kind of platform you'd want to host on. Drupal VM works with all of them. So anyway, so that's a neat little tip that I always forget to mention. On top of that, a lot of Drupal sites need a specific tool or two for certain features. So a lot of sites that I work with use Apache Solr. And if you wanted to install Solr, so if you want to override the configuration, what you do is you basically create a config.yaml file. So I'm just going to duplicate this file and call it, call it config.yaml. And if I open this up, you only need to include things in here that you actually want to override. So in my case, I'm going to leave all the defaults for now, but I want to actually install Apache Solr so that I can install some search things on my site. And I also want to have xhprof, which is a tool for profiling my code, and xdebug, which is a tool for debugging my code. So I'm just going to uncomment these. There's also other things like Blackfire is another tool for profiling your code. Elasticsearch is similar to Solr in that it can help you with your site search. Java, you don't actually have to enable that if you just need Solr, but if you just needed Java for some Java applet or whatever that you were building on your server. And then there's Memcache for speeding up Drupal a little bit. New Relic, also a profiler. Node.js, if you have, this is one thing where a lot of Windows developers want an environment that they can easily build their front-end stuff in. And on Windows, I don't know if anyone here, I guess I'll ask, is anybody in the room using Windows primarily? Nobody? Oh, that's pretty amazing. Okay, so if you ever use Windows or somebody on your team ever used Windows, or if a friend did, you find that there are certain things that cause headaches a lot, and Node.js is one of them. So what we recommend at Acquia sometimes, and what I recommend most of the time, is if you're using Windows, do the front-end stuff inside the VM using Node.js, and Drupal VM installs it and sets it up for you. Redis is just like Memcache, it's for caching. Ruby is sometimes also used for front-end builds, like for SaaS and things like that. Selenium is for running tests inside the VM. And then upload progress lets you have that pretty little upload progress bar when you're uploading lots of pictures and things. Anyway, so I want Solr, xdebug, and xhprof. And to install them, you just comment them out in here. And I'm going to delete all these other things since I don't need any other overrides. I'm going to uncomment them, and then I run vagrant provision. And then Drupal VM, it'll take a few minutes, but it will go through and install those things. And it will also configure everything so I can start using them. So while that's happening, any other questions at this point? Seeing none, I will move on. I'm going to take a look at my little agenda because I have no idea if I'm following or not.
I actually have a question.
Yes.
I'll awkwardly stand next to you again. So there's, in VirtualBox, there's tools that allow you to connect to the host's machine, like if you wanted to share files, directories, etc. Mm-hmm. Have you done any of that with Drupal VM so that you can have some extensibility there? Or
yes. Yeah, so Drupal VM actually lets you set up an array of synced folders, and by default it just syncs the folder that Drupal VM is downloaded into, and that's why it actually installs Drupal inside the VM, but it's through a shared folder, and so you can see it from your host. So this is the one that's created by default. You can technically you could delete this one and just have everything inside the VM if you wanted. Otherwise, you can add another folder. So like, let's say I had a folder in my sites folder. If I go local path it's /sites/Drupal 7 project. And then I'd say destination var/www/ Drupal 7. Oops, Drupal 7 type NFS. And also for these shares, you can choose between different options that Vagrant has. NFS on the Mac is usually the most stable and least surprising, so I usually use it. But you could use native shares, you could use rsync, whatever. If you're familiar with Vagrant, you'll know all the caveats there. But if you're not, there's some documentation about it. So you'd set that up, and then this would share this folder on your host machine with this path inside the VM. So then you could create an Apache, where is it? You could create a virtual host for that path. So I'd say create a virtual host with my Drupal 7 site.dev. And then you can set the document root to that document root you just set up, which would be var/www/ Drupal 7. And then now, if I were to provision this VM again, it would set this up for me. And I would be able to go to my Drupal 7 site.dev and access the code that's in this synced folder that I just created. So you can manage those things in the config. And you wouldn't do that in this default file. You'd be doing that in here, of course. I'm totally doing things the wrong way. Do as I say and not as I do, as it were.
Thank you.
Yep. So this is getting closer to finish. So it's installing PHP. And what it's doing here, since I had this all pre-installed before we started this, this was already done before, but this is Ansible doing all of this work. Ansible is a tool, it's a configuration management tool that basically says, give me some options and I will build a server for you that has those options. And so I have, in Drupal VM, there's a bunch of different roles, they call them in Ansible, kind of like modules in Drupal. Each role manages a separate part of your server. So there's a role for this adminer, there's a role for Solar, and a role for all these other things. And Ansible runs through them all and builds your server based on what you tell it. So in our case, we're telling it all the stuff inside of this default configuration file, plus we're telling it also install me some extra things. And the Solar install actually takes it.
You wrote the book on Ansible if you want to plug that as well.
What was that?
I said if you want to plug your book, I feel like.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm terrible at marketing. So I actually wrote a book on Ansible. And whoops, that's totally not the book. I wrote a book on Ansible, and it's a book that's always in progress. I actually finished the first actual major version in October 2015, but I've been revising it usually on a quarterly basis to keep up with the latest versions of the software. So if you buy the book today, if you buy it on LeanPub, you'll get the latest updates all the time. If you're interested in DevOps, or if you're interested in configuration management, automation, that kind of thing. And the book is still going, so I'll keep advertising. The book has examples of how to build Drupal sites, and let me see if this is disconnected. It even talks about how you can configure. Can you see this?
Yeah.
You can configure your Raspberry Pi cluster of computers. You can configure all kinds of things, Internet of Things, devices. Ansible is basically a general purpose automation tool, and I like it a lot. I use it for a lot of things, including Drupal VM. So anyway, if you want the book, and if you want, you can ping me on Twitter and I'll send you a coupon code, or send me an email, or carrier pigeon, whatever you want. It'll take a lot longer if you send me a carrier pigeon though. So this is almost finished. And then let me go back to this issue and see if there's anything else. So I was going to look at adding a module to a Drupal 8 site. We talked about where to go for help. Also, if you download Drupal VM and encounter any issues, go ahead and go to this project on GitHub. It's linked from the website for Drupal VM. go here and go to the issues and file a new issue and ask away. We're very, very happy to help with any problems that you'd run into. And I think, yeah, we're up to over 1,000 issues now, and it's been a good journey. So once this finishes, I'll show you a little bit about Xdebug and XHProf. Looks like it's just about finished. Once it finishes the security role, there's just about 10 or 20 more tasks to run. And almost. And actually, to use XHProf, I think we need to install the Drupal XHProf module. So I'll show you how you can do that. Who here? Also another question. This is something just generally speaking in terms of Drupal. It's a weird era right now because we're switching from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. Some people are still on 7. Some people are coming into Drupal 8 after having done no Drupal before. How many people here have used Composer before, like to do any Drupal work? So a lot of people are familiar with it. How many people would call themselves Composer experts? Notice my own hand is not raised. So it's an interesting time because a lot of people are doing things a lot of different ways, and Drupal VM tries to show you the right way to do things in terms of what's the most stable and all that, but sometimes there are things that might be a little surprising. Anyway, I'll show you how with the setup that it gives you, I'll show you how you can install a module using Composer and then install it through Drush with Drupal VM. And actually, there's also a tutorial if you're interested in search and Solar ever. If you go to jeffgeerling.com, there's an article. I'm just going to search for Solar. That doesn't help too much. Solar Drupal 8. So anyway, I don't know where. Oh, here we go. Setting up faceted search. I actually have a video tutorial for this that uses Drupal VM to build everything, and it's the same kind of process that I just went through today. You create a configuration file, you tell it to install Apache Solar, and then you make sure it downloads these special modules to get Solar running. I'm not going to do that today because that'll take like an extra 20 minutes, and I don't know about you guys, but I have other things to do tonight at some point. But anyway, this guide goes through that process. And it looks like it just finished installing everything. So, so at this point, if I go to XHProf, actually I'll show you if I go to the dashboard. If I go to the dashboard, I think it should be updated. And now it shows you, here's the link to look at your Solar administration dashboard. And if I go there, you can see this is Apache Solar's interface. And you can manage Solar there. 404 not found. Let's go back here. And then XHProf also has its own little landing page where you can see all of the runs that happen on your machine. Right now, I haven't profiled anything, so there's nothing here. But I'm going to download Drupal.org XHProf. Here it is. So to install with Composer, I just am going to say, under the Drupal directory. Okay, so inside the Drupal directory, there's this Composer, this window is in the way. There's this Drupal composer.json file. And we want to get XHProf as a module in here. So what I'm going to do is there's a few ways you can do this. One way is you could edit the file by hand, but that's not the preferred way when you're using Composer. So I'm going to say Composer require, and that's basically saying like require this project as part of my project. Drupal/XHProf, and this is the machine name of the module, which is this part of the URL. And then for the version, they only have a development release for this module, so I'm going to just grab this and say, put that there. Let's see what that does. So it's going to go out and fetch the module. A lot of times, the first time you ever run a Composer command, it takes a little while because it has to do a lot of fetching of things. But as time goes on, Composer caches things a little better. It's still a lot slower than doing Drush DL, if anybody here is very familiar with Drush. Anyway, so it's adding the module to my code base. And if that ever finishes, here it goes. It's installing the module and writing the lock file. Okay, and then I can install the module with drush, drupalvm.drupalvm.dev, en-y xhprof. And I think that's all I need to enable. Oh, yes. Yes. I must have done this demonstration a little bit earlier. Enable the module. Okay, so it's enabled, and if I go to my extend page, I should see that it's enabled here. Just want to confirm that I didn't just enable it on some production server somewhere. And if I go to xhprof, it's enabled. If I go to the configuration page, I can tell it enable profiling, use xhprof, and profile everything. Actually, I don't want to, oh yeah, I'll do that. Save configuration. And now it should, I think that if you go, I don't remember the default configuration for this module, but I think if you go to any page on the site, it'll save a profile for that page. So if I go here, it gives me a little xhprof output link. And I click on it, and it gives me the report. It says that page took 2.7 seconds to load, which is terrible. But it can tell you exactly what's going on. The interface for the module is a little bit shaky at this point. I think that there's still some work on getting it to run better. And I think, yeah, it also saves the report in the Drupal VM dashboard. And this is actually a little more useful because this UI lets you do something really cool and helps you find exactly where problems are by clicking on this link, which is a call graph. It lets you explore your page request graphically. And usually it takes a little while to generate this because it's rendering a giant picture with lots of lines and squiggles and things. So once it does this, if it does this, anyway, you can also go through here and look at what things take the longest exclusive all time. That's basically what functions are running on your site that take the longest. xhprof and Blackfire and tools like it. I think there's, what's the other one? Like Tideways. They're really helpful, and New Relic and AppNata. There's a lot of different tools that do this, but they're really helpful in finding if you have like one of your APIs that you use in your website, or one of the, like Share This, or some other third party that you're getting data from. If one of them is being really slow, you can quickly see exactly where that is by using xhprof, at least for anything on the back end. This is going really slow. I wonder if it like locked up the process or something. But maybe we'll give up on the call graph for now. I'm going to open that in a separate tab and go back here. So that's one other thing that Drupal VM lets you get really easily. It used to be really annoying, like you'd have to download something and run some commands and do all these crazy things just to get a xhprof running. But with Drupal VM, it's now, you just go in here and make sure that it's uncommented and you have it. So I like that a lot. That's why I built it, because I hated having to run all those commands by hand. Drupal VM also comes with Varnish, which is cool because Varnish and Drupal 8 play really well together. It's by default, it's installed on port 81. So if you go to port 81, it'll actually load the site through Varnish. And it looks exactly the same, but if I go in to my developer tools and refresh, then I can see, oh goodness, I'm still getting used to Safari sometimes. Is it under resources? Here we go. If I go down to the response, request response, powered by PHP via Varnish. So it's showing that it's coming through Varnish, but it'll also show by default, Varnish doesn't cache anything. You have to go into Drupal's configuration and performance and tell it to cache pages. But anyway, there's a lot of these kind of things that Drupal VM gives you for free. Another one is Xdebug. And just for the sake of time and the sake of every time I've ever done this live demo, I end up wasting a bunch of time. I'm not going to show you how it works with Sublime Text, but it it generally works pretty easy unless you are like me and you always keep messing up your IDE's XHProf or Xdebug connections. The instructions for that are in docs.drupalvm.com. And if you go to here we go, Xdebug. So it has instructions for using PHP Storm, Sublime Text, or NetBeans. And you just have to make sure that you have whatever, with PHP Storm it's built in, and I think NetBeans might have it built in too. Sublime, I think that there's a package you have to do, package control list. Whoops, no, I didn't want to do that. Package control list packages. It is, yeah, see, oh, there, okay, so it's the Xdebug client package. It's called Sublime Text Xdebug, and I have it installed, and I would show it to you, but as I said, every other time I spend like 10 minutes, and for some reason I always have it working generally, but that's when I have it configured for a project, and I don't want to waste the time here. But anyways, so let's see, I think I've covered most of these things, and you guys said that nobody uses Windows. I'll just point you to, if you have a friend that uses Windows and ever wants to use Drupal VM, point them to the documentation pages, because there's actually probably like 7,000 hours worth of labor that went into the documentation that you see for Windows, because for some reason, a lot of things don't work the same on Windows. And there's also a few notes for Linux. There's some PC manufacturers do things to their laptops that make it a little bit more difficult to get up and running sometimes, but most don't, especially the developer editions of those laptops. I think, so we're about 7:15-ish almost, and I know that I don't want to take up too much more time, and you guys can talk there, and I need to run upstairs and help my wife get kids to bed at some point. But do you have any other questions about Drupal VM or comments or anything? I see a hand. You can either scream as loud as you can or come up to the computer. Because
I get loud enough. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. That works.
Basically, I know you had mentioned Varnish. Would you recommend that over Memcache for Drupal 8?
So Memcache and Varnish actually do a couple different things. They do the same kind of thing, but they're different approaches, and a lot of people actually use them together. Memcache is best for caching objects that would be stored in your database. And you can use it for some other things too, but that's the general way that you'd use it in Drupal. And it basically is like a layer of caching in front of your database that makes certain things like users log in and logged in access and things like that faster. Varnish is often best for caching for anonymous users, people who aren't logged in. You can get it to cache things for logged in users too, but if your site is mostly, like for instance, my public website, jeffgeerling.com, I get every once in a while, if I'm lucky, like today I posted an article dissing the MacBook Pro, even though I love it, but I hate it. But anyway, I posted an article, it got to the front page of Hacker News, and it was getting 900 requests per second. Varnish is like, oh yeah, that's nothing. If you had Apache running like that, or even Nginx is pretty good about it too, but if you had Apache running with that kind of traffic and you didn't have it configured exactly the right way, it would just die immediately. So Varnish is great for handling that kind of load and streaming files faster. And another neat thing about the way that Drupal VM is set up is the configuration is specific for Drupal, and things like BigPipe in Drupal 8 and what else? BigPipe and the dynamic page cache and things like that all work out of the box. Although some of the things you have to do a little bit of extra configuration inside of Drupal, they all work. So a lot of sites don't necessarily need Varnish, but if you ever have a huge traffic surge, Varnish would save your life in those cases. Memcache would help, but it wouldn't save your life, I don't think. Save your site. You probably wouldn't die, but you would feel like you'd want to die for a little bit.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Looks like nothing. All right. Well, I'm going to let you guys get back at it, and I'm going to go put some kids in bed. And have fun making lots of VMs.
Thanks, Jeff.
So I'm gonna stop my share. I'm guessing you're going to stop the recording.